Okay, so it's time for another Dear Authors video, and if you're not familiar with the series, I will link the playlist up there and down in the description, but it's basically just readers coming together and chatting about what we like seeing in books and what we don't like seeing in books. These videos have gotten found quite a bit by the writing community on YouTube, so just to be clear, I'm not giving writing advice. I'm not qualified for that. I'm just chatting with readers about what we like and don't like when we read. So this time we're chatting about some great ways to draw us in at the beginning of the book. I posted a community tab asking for the best ways to get you really invested at the start of a book. It could be a certain hook or theme or trope or something that will instantly make you invested rather than having to get through the beginning and then maybe like the book. So I'm filming this the day after I posted that community tab, and I'm going to start off with some of the comments that are the highest upvoted, and then I'll just run it through a random comment generator so that, you know, any comment can be selected. When the author starts you off from the POV of somebody already midway through what they're doing and you're just along for the ride, slowly piecing it together for yourself. Brandon Sanderson does this really well with both the openings in The Final Empire and Warbreaker. He also kind of does this in the Stormlight Archive. He has like 4 false beginnings. Sanderson loves to really take his time with his beginnings, and he's a great storyteller. I don't tend to love the way he starts off his books, especially the first books in a series. I guess I'm different from you in that I sometimes I'm okay with starting out with a character halfway through a task, but generally I don't care for it. I like knowing what's happening and feeling like I can track along and move with the characters fairly easily. I think that's why I love hard magic systems so much. I like rules and boundaries and knowing what is allowed and then seeing how chaos and confusion can be created within the boundaries, and soft magic systems are a lot harder for me to track with because anything could happen at any point, and you know, we could be 3 books in and we could be like, oh, apparently magic does this now, because there's never been any rules or boundaries created, and that kills me. Even though I know people love soft magic systems, I like knowing what's happening. An example of a book that does what you're describing is the Broken Earth trilogy. The first book, I had no idea what was happening for so long, and then when things did start falling into place, it was so satisfying. So it's not like I don't like books that do that. It could definitely be done well. It's just not the way I choose to have things done. But it's a good answer. It's a really good answer. When the tone of the book is immediately evident, such as Good Omens and Percy Jackson, the start doesn't pull any punches. Within a few sentences, you know the book will be hilarious. I agree with you. I love a good tone setter, whether it's hilarious or it's an exceptionally dark book or it's going to be a psychological thriller, whatever genre I'm reading. I love when the first chapter really sets the tone and I get really creepy vibes, or I can tell that no one within the story is going to be reliable, or I can see that this world is extremely dark and this is going to be a really dark story. Like, I love when the author, they don't have to spell it out for me or anything, but just sets the tone from the very start. That will instantly hook me, because then it's like I know at least a little bit of what I'm in for, and I'm excited for more. Okay, next comment, 2 opposite beginnings. The first is to drop in on the middle of something that happened either way before the story will happen or later, that leaves you with an epic feeling and tons of questions. This is one that we've discussed. The opposite is the opening on an ordinary person going through an ordinary day. It has you sitting on pins and needles because you know the extraordinary has to jump out somewhere. Example, Harry Potter and the Lord of the Rings books. Yes. The Wheel of Time series is another example of a series that does that really well. I am a sucker for beginning in a small village or a small rural town. Make your beginning very confined, very ordinary, has a strange sort of culture of its own. Like the Shire is a very unique culture. Build up the small town life and then take us out of that small town, or even just stay there. I even really like books where it all takes place in just a creepy small town. But I hard agree Actually, I know a lot of people don't like this because I buddy read a lot of books. And when I'm buddy reading and we start in a small town or a small village, almost always someone doesn't like that beginning and finds it really boring, but I eat it up like nobody's business. Start in a scene, save the exposition for later. I half agree with this. While I don't enjoy starting in the middle of a lot of action or a big task and just following the character and having no explanation whatsoever, which is what we've already discussed, I do enjoy just starting in a scene, just watching the character do everyday life, watching, just getting an idea of what life established looks like before we change that narrative. You know, movies, specifically a lot of Disney movies do this. I've been watching a lot of Disney movies lately because my son is at the age now where he likes movies. And I've noticed that a lot of Disney movies start out with a narrative, maybe a floating camera scene over the village that we're about to join, or watching crowds of people do their daily life with the main character narrating, here's where we started, and then we enter the scene. It seems like a lot of children's movies specifically, but also a ton of movies in general, start with that, here's a narrative. And I always have to skip that for my son because he'll instantly tell me he doesn't like the movie if it starts that way. We need to start on action for him. But I actually really don't like that in books either. A lot of books will start with a prologue or a first chapter that's essentially a narrative. Let me tell you what's going on, even though you don't know who I am at all yet. The Book Thief does that, and it does it really well. So I'm not saying it can't be done well, but generally, I tend to also prefer starting with a scene of some sort. It doesn't have to start with a epic fight scene. It doesn't have to start with something intense. It can, but you can start with just daily life. It's just nice to begin getting to know your characters. And for me, if you start off a scene where I have a really good idea who your main character is right away, whether they be that really snarky protagonist that has way too big of an ego that needs to be deflated, or if they're just a humble farm girl, farm boy who is about to have their life turned upside down, whoever your main character is, if you start me off by knowing the essence of who they are, the big characteristic character trait that we're going to follow, if you can start with a scene of them defending someone, of them being beaten down, whatever it is, I will latch on to that character right away, and then it won't really matter to me if the setup of the story takes more time, as long as I have a person that I'm interested in following through. Start with a scene that actually establishes relationships between the main characters. Show, don't tell. And what happens doesn't have to be really related to the rest of the story. See Christmas in Little Women. Yeah, so that's essentially what I was just talking about. Just start something that helps us to establish some sort of connection, whether it's connection with the characters, connection with the world, depends on what kind of story you're writing. But that can also really help set the tone. Like if you want to start out with a really character-focused beginning, like in Little Women, that helps us know that this book, the main focus is going to be on the relationships and the people. If you're going to start with a lot of world building and really interesting magic system, then we know that this is an epic fantasy, and that's really where you're going to put your focus. And it also helps the readers to know from the get-go what is going to be the focus and the emphasis on this story. And am I a character-driven reader, or am I a reader that just wants a really cool magic system? I mean, nobody just wants one thing out of a story, but you know what I mean. Readers want different things, and the first chapter can really help us to know if this story is going to focus on something that we like or that we isn't for us. When smart, planned foreshadowing starts early, then I get invested in trying to figure out what it's all leading to. Of course, it all has to have a good end climax after this, though. Yes, I agree. If you can start a book clearly showing that this is foreshadowing for something big and it's a relatively interesting scene, that is definitely going to make me invested as well. In general, books that have great payoff, I think the Mistborn series is a great example of that, where little details from book one, by the time you get to the end of the series, you realize how much thought and intention went into it. That's also what I loved about The Ocean at the End of the Lane. By the time I got to the end of the book, I was like, holy cow, Neil Gaiman planned every word, because it all came together so cleanly. And if I can tell from the very beginning that this is an author that thought about the end before they wrote the beginning, and it seems like it's going to come together in a way where all the pieces fall together. Man, I can't stand loose ends. Ooh, when you have like several subplots and a couple of them just don't get resolved, even, it's okay if they don't get resolved after the first book, but after the end of the series, the Giver Quartet is a great example of that. It'll actually, the Giver Quartet I loved until I finished the end and I was like, oh my gosh, that was so unsatisfying. It'll leave me not loving the series nearly as much if you have so many open threads that never get resolved. So when I can tell from the start that an author thought about all the details and mapped it all out and then started writing, that will instantly make me want to read your whole series or whatever you have for me. Because if I can trust you to really bring it all together, especially if you bring it all together in really intricate, small ways, ooh, I eat that up. Really strong, epic lines like Ash fell from the sky. That's another Mistborn. Nice. I love how many Brandon Sanderson fans we have here. Yeah, I don't super care about a big, like a one-liner like that. That doesn't really matter to me. I think I agree with the people that say just starting off with a tone, a scene, that's what matters to me. I don't really care about a hook one-liner. I care about setting the tone for the entire book. Okay, I really like this one. I personally love it when the opening is quotable. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Marley was dead to begin with. There was no doubt whatsoever about that. Both of these are first lines in classics. And I agree with that because that is different from, for instance, Mistborn Ash Fell from the Sky, where it's more of like a dramatic hook. But I think that these are more like with The Book Thief, where it's sort of, again, setting the tone, kind of explaining, kind of giving you like, here's what we're in for from the very first line. Does that make sense? I feel like that's a small enough distinction that it may not seem like enough, but I see the distinction. I see what I'm talking about. So we've had a couple of comments like this that I've already passed by, so I'm finally going to say it. I love when books start off with a villain or mysterious character doing something seemingly pointless that later blows up the plot and has big consequences. Several people have mentioned loving to start with the villain because they love villains, and if you start off with a really strong villain, then it doesn't matter what the rest of the beginning is doing. I just want to keep reading to get to the villain. Personally, I don't enjoy that. I love it when we don't get the perspective of the villain at all in a straightforward narrative. Something like The First Law, where really nobody is good, everybody is morally gray or just downright bad. Great, give me all the perspectives in the world. But for your standard narrative where we're following the hero, I don't want breakaway scenes from the villain because I want to figure things out with the protagonist. I don't like knowing more than the protagonist. But that's definitely a preference thing, and several people have said that they love starting off with the villain, so I'll put that in there. I think the best way to open up books is to not overdo it. I'm interested mostly in characters and setting in the first chapter. Most people will read a book based off of the summary, not the first chapter. I think the best way to do this is to start off mundane with a small twist at the end. I agree with that. I love a chapter that, oh my gosh, sets the scene. Say it one more time, Murph. I love a first chapter that is just day-to-day life, but at the end, something happens that changes everything, and you're just like, oh, now I gotta see what's going on. Like, oh, that's such a good way to start a book. One of my favorite openings from John Dies at the End, with basically a long hypothetical situation that one of the characters poses about an axe. He described breaking the handle on a slug monster, chipping the head on a zombie, and replacing all the parts, and then wondering if the remained zombie is right when he says it's the axe that killed him. I like this because it establishes the tone, setting, and character in a unique way. There's monsters. He fights them. He's a nervous overthinker. Everything you really need to know up front, but without just an info dump. Most of the books that draw me in quickly don't just explain the universe. They start with characters interacting with the universe in a human way. Man, you just summed up perfectly what I've been repeating over and over again. That's perfect. You're right. That's phenomenal. It sets the tone of the entire book. I've never read this book, but now I want to. It sets the tone of the entire book, lets us know what the main character is like, what the world is like, what we're going to be doing with this main character, or at least an element of that. It sets all that up without just one big monologue, explanation, info dump. It sets us up with a scene, with a character doing something that provides all the information that could have been provided through an info dump, but it's provided in a more organic, natural, and enjoyable to read way. Man, that's a great comment. You win the comment of the day. Please do not open describing the setting or the character's appearance. Get me started on plot-relevant facts, or show me the relevant aspects of a key character's personality right away. That's a good one. It is disappointing when a book starts out with a character looking in the mirror describing their features or something that just really doesn't matter. A lot of readers care a lot about a character's appearance, so it's good to give that appearance fairly early on. You don't want to tell us that the character has brown hair halfway through the book when half of the readers have decided that they're something else. But also, a lot of readers like me, I don't care how a character is described physically. I'm going to imagine them how I'm going to imagine them. You can tell me a character has blonde hair. For instance, Kelsier has blonde hair. He is a blonde-haired man. Did you know that? I didn't, because I don't care. He's a brunette in my mind. It doesn't matter to me how characters are described. I'm going to project an appearance on them based on how I view the character. So appearances are important to a lot of readers, but also a lot of us don't care about that, especially if you're trying to get us invested in the story. What color your character's eyes are is not going to matter on if I'm going to turn the next page. So starting off with something relevant to the story, again, setting the scene, setting the tone of the whole book is a lot more important than telling us what the character's bedroom looks like or what color eyes they have or what outfit they're wearing that day. I want the author to show me their strengths. This book has a unique writing style. Show me your flowery sentences or dry humor. Strong characters, make them interact. Beautiful world, describe a character walking through your scenery, etc. Again, this is a long-time subscriber, someone that I know and I recognize, I love her. But again, she described what I've been trying to say. She summarized it perfectly. Whatever your strengths are, whatever it is that you're trying to do with the book, wherever you're laying your focus, if your skill is going to be in your beautiful or silly writing, put it on display. Make it the forefront of your first chapter. If your story is going to be really focused on characters and relationship and the dynamic between them, give us an opening scene with these characters interacting with their really unique, strong personalities. If your story is going to be an epic fantasy that's going to have so much focus on world and magic, give us that in the first chapter. The point is, there are different things that authors do, different strengths that authors have, different focuses that authors have in their stories, and there are different readers for different stories. I've had people recommend books to me and say it's the best book they've ever read, and then I pick it up and I'm like, there's no story here. And then people will respond and say, oh, I guess that's true. There isn't a story. I read it for the writing. And that's amazing, but different readers want different things. The best way for an author to make sure that they find their audience, the best way for an author to make sure that the right people keep reading is to let us know in the very first chapter what the author's focus is going to be for this story. That way we know, based off of the first couple of chapters, we know if this book is going to be something that we should just put down and grab something that might work better for us, or if it's something that is going to be perfect for us. Man, setting the tone, it's the best thing to do. This is a really good one. I like it when they don't start off by explaining each character's personalities. It's always best to show, not tell. This is a really silly example, but it's the first thing that popped into my head. Instead of saying, Strawberry Shortcake is a super nice girl who always sticks up for her friends, you could show her doing nice stuff for people. people. Don't tell about how everyone feels about the character until you've gotten to know them for a chapter or two. This is really good. It's the show don't tell, but the best way to get me invested is to show me your character. If you want me to care about your character, show me your character doing the thing that I'm supposed to believe about them. Man, it's so frustrating when I get to the end of the book and all I've done is listen to other characters talk about how strong and brave and intimidating a character is, but I've never once watched them do anything. Or you tell me that this character is so romantic and sweet and nice, but I've only seen him be a jerk. It is so frustrating. And I read this not infrequently. It's so frustrating when an author just repeatedly tells me how I'm supposed to feel about characters, and it may not be in this so openly obvious as the example given here, but just when characters are constantly talking about the main character and how I'm supposed to feel about them, or the narrative is repeatedly telling me how I'm supposed to feel about people, but I never watch the characters do the thing. Well, I know how not to get me invested, and that's by starting the first chapter on a prologue from some point of view of a character that has absolutely nothing to do with the actual main characters of the book. That's kept me from reading Six of Crows for a long time. Hard agree. Prologues are not a negative thing, but if you start off your book from a perspective that has nothing to do with what we're gonna do next, it's a tough sell. Fast forward to midway through the book or the end and give me a look at the main characters in some kind of messed up situation. I mean, really messed up. Make them as different from how they were at the beginning of the journey as possible, and then proceed to show me, after the first chapter, how they got to that point. I do like that too. It's different from intense action or from a perspective of a character that we're not even going to follow for the rest of the book. It's the main character that we're following, that we're supposed to be invested in, and it's showing us where we're about to be without giving us too much detail. That can be really great as well. All right, I've been recording for about an hour now, so I'm going to quit. But I've sorted through a ton of comments, and pretty much everybody's saying really similar stuff. So I'm going to summarize the last 5,000 comments I've just read through. That's an exaggeration. Things that keep coming up. A lot of people love being thrown into the middle of action and love having to run pace with the characters and try to figure it all out with them. And a lot of people love slow, quiet beginnings, but still beginning in a scene. Starting out with day-to-day life and watching what the character's life looks like now before everything changes. So those are two very opposite things, and a ton of people have said both, so both beginnings seem to work for large groups of people. One thing that repeatedly comes up in the negative is info dumps or a long narrative stream. I have repeatedly read comments of people saying, don't give me an info dump or a big exposition dump. Don't just tell me everything at the beginning of the story. I want to watch things unfold. I want to experience things with the characters at the beginning. I have not read a single comment that said, I love a big narrative beginning. And I definitely agree with that. I don't like that either. Start me with a scene, not an explanation. Quite a few people have written down their favorite beginning opening line, so a good, interesting opening line seems to be great for a lot of people. There have been several people that have said that they really enjoy the first scene being exclusively about the villain and then moving on to the protagonist that we're going to follow. And then there have been several people that have said that they don't like things like that. They just want to start with what's relevant to what they're going to be following. So it seems like either one of those choices could work. But one other really consistent thing that people are saying is don't give me some random character that we're never going to see again. So don't start us off with the father of the protagonist or some random side character that's giving us some odd view. We like either the villain if he's going to be a really big part of the story, or we like whether we start on their day-to-day life or we start on a flash forward or flash back. Just make sure that you got someone relevant. And the other thing that is coming up a ton, that I've already talked about a ton, is setting the tone. People seem to really agree that we don't want just some abstract scene. We don't like just having something that doesn't really fit with the tone of the novel. We like having the first line, the first page, the first chapter. We like it to set the tone of what we're going to be doing, who we're going to be following, what kind of story, how dark it's going to be, how silly it's going to be, what it's going to focus on. We like that to be the focus of the first chapter. We don't want the first chapter to be one that we throw away and don't think about again. We want it to be one that we can rely on and trust to keep reading the book. There are tons of different ways to write a novel. There are tons of different things that you can focus on, and there are tons of different readers that will find what they're looking for. But these are some themes that have definitely come up today. These are some things that have been repeated so much, almost, it's really funny. I can pretty much categorize almost all of these comments into maybe 3 or 4 different things that everybody seems to be saying. Even if some of them disagree with each other, everybody seems to fall into certain camps, which I didn't expect. I expected there to be a lot of different answers because that's what we've done in every Dear Author video before this, but this one seems to have a mass majority for what people like and don't like. So I found that really interesting. I wasn't expecting that, but I'm really happy about it. I don't agree with all of them. There are definitely, everything is a preference thing, but it was really interesting to see people fall into certain camps and how few camps there were on this. Anyway, I would love to continue the discussion. So if there's anything that you want to keep chatting about, if you want to talk about what you love to see in the opening or tell me your favorite opening scene and what book it came from, I would love to hear it. I post videos every Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.